And let's move over to Newcastle, Paul. Jose Mourinho just loves to put his name out there in the headlines, putting his name up for this Newcastle job. Do you really think that could happen, or even would that even be a good fit with this Newcastle squad and what's been going on there with the takeover?
Listen, we can't talk about a Newcastle job when Eddie Howe's still in position. I mean, the England job for Eddie Howe, I suspect, was a huge pull and a huge draw. But if you believe what you read, he was never asked about the England job, and he was never, brought into the FA for a conversation. When you look at what Eddie Howe's done at that club, when they were the relegation, keeping them in the Premier League, he's built block by block, signed players for current situations and taken them to where they are now. I think it's very, very unfair to talk about another manager taking over Eddie Howe's job. But actually, when you look at Jose Mourinho coming back to the Premier League, where's he going to go? I mean, I was at the Man United Fenerbahce game, and I sat in his press conference after the game. It was fantastic. He's just literally his box office. As soon as those lights come on, he's brilliant. He loves it. I mean, he sat there for almost an hour afterwards. We didn't leave the stadium until local time, 1 o'clock in the morning. And he was talking, he was engaging, and he was his usual brilliant self. Talked about referees' decisions. We saw him at the end of last season talk about UEFA and the decisions that were in the final. He said he didn't want to manage a club that plays in this competition. He just throws the lines out, and the press bite and the media bite, and you can see what he wants. If he gets a move back to the Premier League, you look at where he could possibly go. So you look at the top of the Premier League. He's not going to Man City. He's not going to Liverpool. He's not going to Arsenal. He's not going to go back to Chelsea. He's already been to Tottenham. So you look at the options that he's got. The opportunities for Jose Mourinho to come back in the Premier League are few and far between. Realistically, with no disrespect to clubs, he's not going to go into the lower half of the Premier League. I can't ever imagine Jose Mourinho managing the likes of Crystal Palace, the likes of Nottingham Forest, those type of teams. Although Forest are, listen, they're fighting well above their weight at the moment, and they're doing fantastically well. But those type of teams, you can't see Jose managing that. So when you actually break it down, Aston Villa, he's not going to Aston Villa because of Unai Emery. He's done a brilliant job. Wherever you look at these top clubs where Jose would probably pitch himself, Newcastle is the only one that, with the ownership that they've got, the status that they've got in the media, the attention, you could see Jose fitting in at somewhere like Newcastle. But other than that, you struggle to see where he comes back into the Premier League.
Most certainly. I mean, that's pretty much the only club still fighting for Champions League spots consistently. Yes, Nottingham Forest obviously punching above their weight, but that Mourinho could really fit in. You know, a deep pocket is always something Jose Mourinho is a big fan of as well with PIF.
Yeah, you can tell he's unhappy in Turkey with Fenerbahce. That's why all these sound bites are coming out from Jose at the minute. As Paul mentioned there, he was on a real charm offensive with the English media when that recent Europa League game between Man United and Fenerbahce. He would love to come back to the Premier League, but like Paul mentioned, I don't see many opportunities open for him. He's 61. He's been in the Premier League 5 times, I think, in his career now. Obviously, Chelsea twice, Tottenham, Man United, and everything else. So I don't see where he comes, but again, if you reflect on the Newcastle side of things, Eddie Howe's just over 3 years in charge. I think he's done a great job. I don't think Newcastle will be planning to get rid of Eddie Howe anytime soon, and they've really improved in recent weeks just before this international break, that big win against Arsenal, and then a very impressive win at Forest as well. So yeah, I don't see where the Newcastle link comes from either. I think Jose might have to look elsewhere if he wants to leave Turkey.
Listen, I like Jose, and I think he's brilliant. I think he's box office. But actually, as a passionate supporter of a club, and you look at how passionate those Newcastle fans are and the relationship that they've got with Eddie Howe and what they think of him, I think you'd struggle to find a handful of Newcastle fans who would happily take Jose Mourinho instead of Eddie Howe.
I'm sure. I mean, I think the opportunity, if you're a Newcastle fan, to have Jose Mourinho as your manager is a hard one to look away from. With more links in Turkey, Pete, with Newcastle, Victor Osimhen, small release clause for a player of that talent, obviously. We talk a lot about how Newcastle, they need to bring in another striker. Isak potentially leaving as well, maybe come this summer. Do you think Newcastle could really try and add him to the firepower in January, maybe letting Callum Wilson leave?
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance a move could happen in January for Victor Osimhen. Obviously, a very protracted transfer saga involving him during the summer transfer window when it looked like he might end up at Chelsea or PSG, but he then ended up going to Galatasaray on loan because Napoli couldn't agree a deal with either Chelsea or PSG. Osimhen, on his day, we know is a world-class striker. He showed that the other week with those couple of goals against Tottenham in the Europa League. It'd obviously be a very high-profile signing and a really exciting signing if Newcastle were to make it, but I just don't see how Newcastle could really pull this deal off. I think he might have more options to consider looking at. He'd be looking to play Champions League football, I think, as well, and his demands are pretty huge. That was another factor that stopped him moving in the summer. So unless he reduces his personal demands, I don't see any potential for Newcastle to sign him. Obviously,
What are
Newcastle.
you looking for, Pete? I mean, transfer fee in January, 60, 70 million January, 50, 60 million in the summer, plus a massive wage packet.
Oh, massive! It's a massive deal all round, Paul. To be fair, the transfer fee will be big. We know Newcastle have been cutting their cloth accordingly recently with FFP, so I just think it'd be too expensive a deal for them to do in the January window, and only in the summer window. If they lost Isak and others, maybe they could move for Osimhen, but I think they'll have other more realistic targets to look at rather than Victor Osimhen, who, as we said, will demand huge wages and the fee as well. I think it could be too expensive for Newcastle to do. As silly as that sounds, with Newcastle being the richest club in the world, I think PSR and FFP would make it almost impossible for them to get that deal done.
I think a lot of us at times we look over the fact that players' wages are all incorporated with FFP and PSR as well, aren't they? So when players get new contracts, etc., the salaries, the wage bill, it's not just the transfer fee that's paid for players, it's the whole package, it's the salary and everything, which obviously plays a huge factor.